Well, the holidays have come and gone once again, but if you've forgotten to get that special someone in your life a gift, well, Mint Mobile is extending their holiday offer of half off unlimited wireless. So here's the idea. You get it now. You call it an early present for next year. What do you have to lose? Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Limited time 50% off regular price for new customers. Upfront payment required. $45 for 3 months, $90 for 6 months, or $180 for 12-month plan. Taxes and fees extra. Speeds may slow after 50 gigabytes per month when network is busy. See terms.
Hello, your friendly neighborhood host, JT Wheatley here again, back for another episode of the History of Comics podcast. This time with part 2 of the history of Pulps, the precursor to American comic books. When we last left off, we were breaking down the different genres of pulps, covering westerns, romance, and now we're going to break into the rest of them. Horror pulp started with Dime Mystery Magazine in October of 1933, though that was not the original intent of the magazine. Harry Steger, the co-owner of Popular Publications, originally started as a companion pulp to the highly successful Dime Detective magazine, meant to feature a complete mystery novel with each issue. However, this proves to be slow-going, and thus Steger decided to take it into a new direction, with the inspiration from the Grand Guignol Theatre in Paris, which featured numerous horror plays with graphic depictions of blood and violence. Thus, with October of 1933, Dime Mystery Magazine went from mystery to supernatural, filled with violence and death. Dubbed the Weird Menace genre, it was an instant success, and soon Steger added terror tales and horror stories to join his line of magazines. Other publishers also noticed and soon Spicy Adventures and Spicy Mystery Stories by Culture Publications under Harry Donenfeld, the future founder of DC Comics, and then on May 1936, Ace Mystery Magazine by A.A. Wynn's group, which only lasted 3 issues, but Wynn wasn't deterred, so he soon followed it with Eerie Mystery and Eerie Stories. Martin Goodman, the future founder of Marvel Comics, published Mystery Tales and Marvel Tales, 2 of the names that would later be under his future comic ventures, and this will be under his Red Circle imprint, one of the many names he gave his companies to avoid paying taxes. In addition, he also published the Real Mystery Magazine, Uncanny Tales, and Uncanny Stories. However, these pulps would be the target of government censorship, specifically the mayor of New York City, LaGuardia, who had a long-time crusader against indecent literature, and this crusade affected all pulps. Popular responded by cleaning up dime mystery, horror tales, and terror tales, moving away from the sex and violence that originally sold those pulps, while also outright canceling Startling Mystery Magazine and Sinister Stories. Much of this controversy came from the covers, which featured numerous images of sex and sadism, especially in Goodman's Red Circle pulps. For example, the cover of Real Mystery on July of 1940 featured a 12-year-old girl being crucified, while the Monster Must Eat story featured cannibalism, which led to the U.S. Post Office revoking its second-class mailing privilege. Ultimately, this increased government scrutiny and the censorship led to the end of the Weird Menace genre in pulps in the 1940s. The science fiction genre wouldn't just be another pulp genre in pulps, but one that could be argued was specifically created by it. While fantastical science tales had appeared long before pulps, notably in the work of Jules Verne and stories like 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, the genre didn't have a name. Originally, these kind of stories were called weird science, futuristic, or just different. That all changed when Amazing Stories premiered in April of 1926 by Hugo Gernsback, Experimental Publishing Company. The magazine would feature writers like noted science fiction and fantasy greats like Isaac Asimov, Ursula K. Le Guin, and Howard Fast. Unlike most other pulps, it still was being published to this day, and it was in this magazine that science fiction finally got its name. It came about from Hugo Gernsback and his Science and Innovation magazine, which created the term scientific fiction, which was later contracted to scientific fiction, eventually finally settling on science fiction. Amazing Stories was followed by Wonder Stories in August of 1929, featuring the first painting of a space station by Frank R. Paul. Paul was famous for his brash fiction covers, and with a background in architectural and mechanical design, everything he drew had a sense of functionality on top of everything else. Paul would brag he never drew the same spaceship twice, though his covers were so lurid some readers asked if Paul could tone it down a bit. However, when they did just that for Amazing Stories in September of 1928, Gernsback noticed the sales dropped significantly, realizing that the brass pictures are what helped sell the magazine. William Clayton would join the genre when he published Astounding Stories of Super Science in January of 1930, though unlike Gernsback's pulps, which stories focused on exploring science technology, Astounding focused on the explosive action and adventure, becoming more sci-fi over science fiction, or as fans would tell you today, Star Wars over Star Trek. Thrilling Wonder Stories would replace Wonder Stories in 1936 after Gernsback sold it to Ned Pines, while Amazing Stories continued under new management when he lost the title. Other science fiction pulps were Startling Stories 1939 and Weird Tales, which started back in May of 1923, featuring the reprints of Edgar Allan Poe and supernatural stories. Weird Tales was founded by J.C. Heinenberger and J.M. Lazener with the Rural Publishing Company. The first issue appeared in March of 1923 and it would feature numerous horror writers, including H.P. Lovecraft, whose Call of Cthulhu first appeared in the magazine in 1928. Robert E. Howard was also a regular contributor, with many of his Conan the Barbarian stories appearing in the magazine, along with Robert Bloch, who later wrote the novel Psycho, on which the classic Alfred Hitchcock movie of the same name is based on. In 1938, the magazine was sold to William Delaney, the publisher of short stories, and during his run, it would feature authors like Ray Bradbury. The magazine ceased publication in 1954, though many attempts were made to revive it. Today, its legacy remains one of the greatest horror anthologies in history. Marvel Science Stories appeared in 1938 from Martin Goodman's Red Circle, and naturally hyped up the sex content, complete with a lurid cover by Frank R. Paul, and then in Strange Tales in 1931, which started to revamp to compete with Weird Tales. Astounding Science Fiction, which was originally Astounding Stories, was bought by Street and Smith in 1933. When John W. Campbell took over in 1938, he brought in a crop of new talent with writers like Robert Heinlein and Isaac Asimov, ushering in what many call the golden age of science fiction writing. The name change came about that March, and on January of 1942, it moved from being a pulp to a digest in November of 1943. Soon, many other pulps converted to the digest formats as well, heralding the beginning of the end of the medium. It's no wonder that Hugo Gernsback was the man who is credited with inventing science fiction genre. Born on August 16th of 1884 in Luxembourg City, Luxembourg, he was originally a radio pioneer and inventor with over 40 patents to his name. Among them, Gernsback developed the first portable home radio. He would move away from inventing with Modern Electronics magazine on April of 1908, which included articles on radio and television. To encourage fellow inventors and experimenters, Gernsback wrote his own story, Ralph 124C41+, a pun on the phrase 124C Mini, a 12-part series starting in April 1911 about Ralph, a super scientist in the year 2660 who goes on an adventure to save a girl kidnapped by Martians. While the story itself has been critically panned, it predicted many modern inventions from the television to solar energy. Gernsback later sold Modern Electrics in 1913 and then started Electrical Experimenter, which would soon become Science and Innovation in 1920. Gernsback then launched Amazing Stories on April of 1926, the first all-science fiction magazine, along with an annual in 1927 and then a quarterly in 1928. However, he would lose them both in 1929, so Gernsback then started Science Wonder Stories, where he coined the term science fiction. This pulp will eventually become Wonder Stories when he learned science on the magazine's cover didn't encourage sales. These magazines would end as well during the Depression in 1936, though Gernsback would try a few more pulps along with other technical magazines. By his death in 1967, he got to see the genre he invented grow and prosper, while Hugo Gernsback is fondly remembered today as the father of science fiction. The Hugo Awards, one of the most prestigious awards for works in science fiction and fantasy, were formed in 1953 and named after him. Across the pond, science fiction never caught on as a genre during this time, though one notable pulp, Tales of Wonder, which ran from 1937 to 1942, did publish Arthur C. Clarke's first professional story. Now to the big picture, one of the most popular genres to emerge later in the pulpium was the hero pulps, with the invention of the shadow. He was created accidentally on July 31st, 1930, as part of an advertising on the radio for Detective Story magazine. Serving as the narrator, the voice actor, James Locurdo, called him the Shadow, complete with a creepy laugh. Street and Smith's business manager, Henry W. Ralston, realized the concept's popularity and moved to trademark it, rushing out a new magazine, The Shadow, a detective magazine, on April 1st, 1931, and hiring a newspaper man turned writer, Walter B. Gibson, under the pen name Maxwell Grant, to create a concept to fit the name along with writing his first story, The Living Shadow. In it, he created the character of Kent Aura, the former World War II aviator who devoted his life to fight crime as the Shadow. However, in a rush to get the magazine out, the character wasn't fully developed, including his look, with the magazine's recycling covers from before hiring Jerome Rosen for the fourth issue's cover. Rosen struggled to give the Shadow a proper look, sometimes even depicting him in a hood until his illness forced him off the job. His twin brother George Rosen took over, and he would finally develop the Shadow's look, using the hook-nosed Street and Smith art director Bill Lawler as his model. Soon, Rosen created the classic look of the Shadow, dressed in a black business suit with a red-lined cloak and a slouched hat, producing a series of covers well into the 1940s. From this, many classic motifs came from the covers, from showing off the Shadow's long-fingered hands, dual-wielding pistols, or in silhouette. Because the Shadow magazine came out every 2 weeks, George Rosen was forced to simplify his covers, but the Shadow came out at the perfect time. It was during the last grasp of Prohibition and the crime wave associated with it, where the Shadow formed the fight. This issue quickly sold out, and soon other pulps followed with hero-centric stories, including reviving older ones like Nick Carter and Dick Savage with their own magazines in 1933. As for the Shadow himself, he would be another chief inspiration for comic book superhero craze in comic books, with his secret identity, use of sidekicks, and clashing with the police. Chiefly, he was a main influence for Bill Finger, Batman's co-creator, who with Bob Kane, who was heavily influenced by another pulp hero, the Zorro, they would form the Dark Knight Detective as we know today. The Shadow today continues mostly as a comic book character himself, and it even had a 1994 film adaptation starring Alec Baldwin. With the success of The Shadow, Street and Smith decided to follow up with a new hero magazine. Under the mandate of executive Harry Ralston and editor John Novick, he was joined by Doc Savage in Doc Savage Magazine #1 in March of 1933, written by Lester Dent. The character was Clark Savage Jr., doctor, explorer, scientist, inventor, and detective all rolled into one. From birth, his father had him trained by a multiple scientist to strengthen his mind and body, with martial arts skills and near superhuman strength. As an adult, Savage lives his life to right wrongs, thanks to his stalwart assistants, ranging from a chemist to an archaeologist, while using his near-endless supply of inventions and high-tech vehicles to battle villains like John Sunlight, thwarting their attempts at world domination. On his covers, Savage was usually depicted heavily muscled with ripped shirts, along with his bronze skin, thus his other name, the Man of Bronze, many of which was drawn by George Rosen. Doc Savage would become a chief inspiration for Superman along with other super scientists in comic books, notably Mr. Fantastic Reed Richards to Alan Moore's Tom Strong, who is very much an homage to that character. Another hero created for Pulps was Kazar, who would be a ripoff of Tarzan and published under Martin Goodman's Manvis Publications, one of the many names his companies, as mentioned before, used to avoid paying taxes. First appearing in Kazar #1 in October of 1936, he was created by Bob Bird, but would only last for 3 issues. Of course, Goodman would eventually found Marvel Comics, taking Kazar with him to the comics page, where he appeared in X-Men #10 on March of 1965, the comic book creation created to Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, where he lives in the Savage Land, a remote area of the world where dinosaurs still live. Double Detective introduced the Green Llama, a costume crime fighter on the April 1940 issue of Volume 5, Number 5, created by writer Kendall Foster Crossgen under Frank M. Munsey's Productions. The character was Jethro Thamont, the son of millionaires who, after inheriting his parents' fortune when they died, traveled to Tibet to study to become a lama, a Buddhist spiritual teacher acquiring mystical powers. He would return to America to spread Buddhist teachings along with fighting crime as the Green Llama. While successful, though not as successful as the Shadow, the Green Llama would enjoy a long run in pulps along with crossing over in the comic books, first appearing in Prize Comics #7 on December of 1940, along with a short-lived radio drama. Since then, the character has appeared mostly as a comic book character after the death of Pulps. As for a few other publishers also produce hero magazines, such as Thrilling with Phantom Detective, a less sinister ripoff of The Shadow, The Spider and G8 and his Battle Aces, and the Secret Service Operative #5 from Popular. Magazine enterprises would produce Secret Agent X, while Thrilling produced Lone Eagle. By 1934, the hero genre dominated Pulp's medium, and Street and Smith followed up in 1936 with The Skipper, a former tough sea boat captain, and The Whisperer, a more hard-boiled version of The Shadow, while Thrilling added FBI agent Dan Fowler with the G-Men. Thrilling also released Texas Rangers, starring Jim Hatfield, who will become the longest single-character pulp of them all. Despite these new releases, this couldn't stave off the effects of depression, and many were canceled in 1937. Thankfully, a new wave of hero pulps emerged in 1939, with Street and Smith releasing The Avenger, while Thrilling produced The Rio Kid and introduced the Black Bat and Black Book Detective. Although it would face a legal issue, as the Batman had just been releasing Detective Comics, and there was a very striking similarity between those two. Kygor, another Tarzan ripoff, debuted in Fiction House's Jungle Stories. A new challenge for hero pulps and pulps in general was the outbreak of World War II and the paper rationing that resulted from it. It also changed the directions many of the hero stories took, such as Sterling's Lone Eagle now fighting Nazis. Nevertheless, many of these pulps were canceled, and with only a few, like The Shadow and Doc Savage, surviving due to the paper rationing. Street and Smith then abruptly ended their pulp line in 1949, while Popular experimented with two more hero titles, Captain Zero and The Pecos Kid. These would also end in 1953, and even the long-lasting Texas Rangers ending in 1958. One pulp hero even came from comic books, with MLJ's The Black Hood. First appearing in Top Notch Comics number 9 in October of 1940, he was created by Harry Shorten, and he was a yellow spandex-wearing hero with a black mask over his face, thus the name The Black Hood, dedicated to fighting crime. He became so popular he was given his own pulp, Black Hood Comics, in 1943, but only lasted for 11 issues, as the 40s were the downtrend for pulps. Today, the Black Hood makes sporadic appearances in comics, and has even been referenced in the Riverdale CW TV series based on the Archie comics, from which MLJ Comics was eventually turned into. It wasn't just heroes, though, that got this line, but villains as well, with Dell releasing Dr. Death in 1935 about Dr. Rance Mandarin, which ran for 3 issues. Other short-lived villain pulps would be The Mysterious Wu Fang for 5 issues, Dr. Yin Zin for 3 issues, and The Octopus in 1939, which was later turned into The Scorpion. Another popular but infamous genre were the sexy pulps, which were more or less softcore porn at the time, which included the magazines like Snappy Stories, Love Stories, and Breezy Stories. However, this would draw the attention of government censors, such as the Parisian in 1915, in which the New York Society of Suppression of Vice brought lawsuits against their publishers and editors. Paris Nights in 1925 was attacked for containing sexy photos inside. Of this genre, Harry Donenfeld, under his Culture Publications, dominated the market with books like Pep Stories in 1927. This would cause trouble for Donenfeld, as he was charged with obscenity for publishing Pep on March 21st, which featured a full frontal depiction of a naked woman. Donenfeld took the charges seriously, especially since it might bring to light some other criminal dealings he was involved in. Donenfeld was a childhood friend of Frank Costello, one of the original heads of the 5 families of the Mafia underworld. Donenfeld's son, Irwin, even claimed Costello was his godfather. During Prohibition, Donenfeld made extra money shipping in Canadian whiskey with his pulp paper shipments, and if the prosecutors investigated him further with the insanity charge, they would discover this as well. Thus, Donenfeld approached Herbie Siegel, an editor who got the job as a family favor, and asked him to take the rap for the Pep obscenity charge. In return, Donenfeld promised to pay all his fines and legal fees, along with a promise of a job for life. Thus, for decades later, whenever a DC employee would notice the old man in the office getting coffee or reading a racing form and ask, "Who's Herbie?" the legend of Harry Donenfeld only grew. After this brief scare, Donenfeld would return to publishing sexy pulps, launching Spicy Detective in April of 1934, mixing the sexy genre with detective stories. It was instantly copied with spicy adventure stories, spicy mystery stories, and spicy western stories. However, by 1938, sexy pulps would finally be regulated out of the market. For Donenfeld, there was also another factor in play as well, as Action Comics #1 premiered that June, introducing the world of Superman and its enormous success has followed, published by his National Allied Publications, the future DC. It was soon followed by Detective Comics #27, introducing Batman. Comic books were breaking into the market and would eventually eclipse pulps. Of the publishers for this genre, none were better than Henry Marcus. In 1936, he was convicted of selling obscene material, fined $1,000, and serving 3 months in jail. Marcus got his start working as an editor of Burton publications, such as work on Nifty Stories and Real Smart in the late 1920s. Marcus then formed Follywood publications with Parisian Life, Hollywood Nights, and the French Follies, all which pushed the boundaries of taste. In 1932, he published Tattletales and Bedtime Stories. Then in September of 1933, Henry Marcus produced Cupid's Capers and Stolen Sweets. He later fired Enoch Bowles as cover artist. All of this ended in 1934, though Donenfeld did continue to publish bedtime stories and Tattletales. Marcus would later do Real Bondier Tales and Real Tempting Tales, Real French Capers, and Real Forbidden Sweets. To avoid censors, he sold them as back issues in second-hand, though. On October 9th of 1934, Henry Marcus was caught red-handed again in a raid by the New York City police, and 12,000 of his magazines were seized and burned. Throughout all this, Howard Powell's art inspired the 20th century America in the 1920s with his advertising art and expanding with manufacturing as products needed ads to sell. He would soon become famous doing covers for classic literature like Alexander Dumas's Man in the Iron Mask and The Adventures of Robin Hood. In 1930, literacy in America exploded while freelance art allowed for greater freedom. The Slicks magazines also expanded with high-end magazine art by the likes of Norman Rockwell. Soon, cover art had little to do with the stories inside the magazines, with Norman Sanders and William Bonhoeffer being two of the most colorful artists at the time. Of the other pulp writers, some notable ones were Joseph Conrad, Arthur Conan Doyle, Jack London, and Upton Sinclair. T.S. Stribling, as mentioned before, won a Pulitzer Prize in 1933 while still providing stories for pulp magazines like Adventure. Many saw pulps as a stepping stone to more respectable slicks like Collier's and Saturday Evening Post, though their stories are not as popular today. Edgar Rice Burroughs and Louis L'Amour were more successful as well, while H. Bedford Jones wrote 25 million words over 40 years. Eric Stanley Gardner wrote while practicing law, while Walter B. Gibson produced 2 novels per month on the Shadow for 10 years straight. Isaac Asimov's 3 Laws of Robotics first appeared in Astounding Science Fiction, which also included science fiction greats like Robert Heinlein and Ray Bradbury, along with the mystery legend Dashiell Hammett. And of course, H.P. Lovecraft and Robert E. Howard, who wrote for Weird Tales. Despite all this talent and success early on, it slowed down for pulp during World War II due to paper rationing, while the afterwards costs soared from 72% from 1944 to 1947. Street and Smith would leave the medium in 1949, followed by Popular in 1955. By 1960, the pulp medium was finished, much of it due to the rise of comic books and paperbacks in the 1930s, with pocketbooks releasing the first one in 1939. It all resulted in a loss of $50 million in sales in pulps, while paperbacks sold $200 million in 1950. Of course, there was also the invention of television, and there was the very thing that pulps inspired to replace them: comic books. Many of the stories told in pulps were visual in nature, from colorful heroes, exotic locales, and action scenes, and all that worked better in a visual medium than a text one. Simply put, the kind of stories no longer worked in pulps when you can see it on the comics page or see it in film and television. The stories they created, storytelling in general, remained, though. The Shadow and Doc Savage would go on to inspire Batman and Superman respectively, while the mystery, western, and various other genres influenced TV and movies to this day. While technology has made pulps obsolete, their stories are forever, and they provided a foundation for entertainment that is today, especially comic books. I would like to thank the chief source for these episodes, The Art of Pulps, An Illustrated History, edited by Doug Ellis, Ed Holtz, and Robert Weinberg, a fantastic chronicle of pulp magazines with fantastic reprints of their many brilliant covers. A must-own for any fan of the genre. And now it is February 26, 2026, time for the favorite comic of the week. Iron Man #2 by Joshua Williamson and Carmine Carnero, which is a great second issue that follows up the premise set by the first issue, when Iron Man finds himself going against Madame Mask, who apparently in the past learned one of his greatest fears, and she's now trying to put it to life as she's trying to create a new Tony Stark by kidnapping geniuses that Tony Stark has identified throughout the world, and he has to find a way to stop her. This is just a great issue that really nails the character of Tony Stark, from the fact he's a visionary, he's a one-man wrecking crew with the Iron Man armor, but also he's got that soft spot weakness where for beautiful women, hence he ends up hooking with Madame Mask, and in an intimate moment he reveals that, oh yeah, my greatest fear is that someone will try to make a new Tony Stark, which is basically when he was trapped in a cave, he didn't make Iron Man, he rebuilt himself. And now she's trying to do that. And it's kind of creepy and sinister. Of course, she's one of the great villains in Marvel. And he has to go up against it. And also it makes some of the other Avengers, like Captain America, question, like, okay, we need to keep an eye on Tony. He's up to something crazy again. Just a lot of fun and a lot of action-packed stuff. It goes into some great classic characters towards the end as well. And, of course, the art by Carmine Carnero is brilliant, looks great, and great action-packed. And Iron Man's never looked better. And already 2 issues in, this looks to be one of the best runs in Iron Man in years. Great read in general, and can't wait to see where it goes. And with that, we'll conclude with this episode of The Archives. Join me again next week for likely another episode of The Archives. I've been doing more research. Got a few more episodes knocked out. Still haven't got my base 10 I want to do before I launch a new season. But until then, go and enjoy some good comic book. And definitely check out this new Iron Man series from Joshua Williamson. It has been hitting out of the park in just 2 issues.